who are you serving and how do you solve that problem? If you're a financial institution and your regulators come and say, if you're unable to show who has access to what and why, we will take your banking license. That is usually a very strong motivation to fix the problem. You're not going to be successful at the end of the day, even if you make a brilliant solution to the problem.
So we have a slightly different setup today. Today we are joined by one of our own, Sham.
Hello, Ben.
Do you want to let everyone know a little bit about yourself before we jump into the episode?
So my name's Sham, new business manager here at SPG Resourcing, and I'm responsible for anything cybersecurity related in Europe.
Well, with that being said, we'll jump straight into the podcast episode with Martin. Martin, great to have you on. I've been looking into your background, and your career spans across some big names, and you've really built a niche in cyber and identity and access management. Can you take us back to the beginning of what first drew you to cybersecurity, and how did you actually find yourself in those roles?
Well, I think it actually started when at university I worked in the computer labs managing the NT4 network. Beginning, and then when I got my degree, I started working as a cybersecurity didn't really exist then, but a security specialist for an enterprise resource planning (ERP) vendor. And then I worked for a few different companies, and then I started doing identity management implementation on a product that was called Tor Accelerate back in 2005. Which then became Oracle Identity Manager. Since then, I've been mostly doing IAM and cybersecurity work across UK, US, and Netherlands, Sweden, and the Nordics.
So what drew you to cybersecurity then? Was there anything specific, or did you just fall into it by accident?
I kind of fall into the accident, or it's a very interesting problem. I'm basically have an engineering background, and I like hard problems to solve. Especially building teams that solve hard problems, because it's always easy to solve a problem or it can be hard to solve a problem itself, but what is really hard is to be able to solve the problem repeatedly at a acceptable cost to the business. That's always the most interesting problem to solve.
Do you think that's one of the most difficult things in cyber? Is that balance?
It is. It's always about trying to see what is the actual business case behind doing something or not doing something. Where does, for example, a best of suite approach work, and where does the best of breed approach work? And how can you build the business case for a specific technology? What is real driver? How do we support? Because at the end of the day, most businesses are about, delivering food or flat packages, furniture. So in most cases, it's all about finding the right balance and finding how you use a limited set of funds in the most efficient manner.
I think that's one thing. I've been talking to quite a few people in cyber in the last few weeks, and that's one thing that comes up over and over again is how do you show the ROI, right? Because it's quite hard to do that. If someone was having that problem within their own organization, what would you say to them?
Cyber usually is connected to your CISO, your cyber organization. And if you look at the business drivers behind it, it is usually, of course, regulatory compliance is often a big part of it. How do you keep your license to operate? If you're a financial institution and your regulators come and say, if you're unable to show who has access to what and why, we will take your banking license. That is usually a very strong motivation to fix the problem. So regulatory compliance, of course, is an important part, but regulatory compliance doesn't necessarily mean security. Of course, there are very few regulations that are completely, disconnected from any. There's usually a reason why it's there, and usually what it tells you to do is usually really good things to do. It's hygiene and basic stuff. But if you look at the security part, becomes a little bit harder. What we have seen is that the the cybersecurity industry is getting better and better at kind of quantifying what really makes an impact. How can they forecast who gets hit and who doesn't get hit? Because, of course, if you look at the cybersecurity, it's mostly assuming that you're not in kind of national security or something that is really kind of critical. It's mostly about you don't need to be faster than the beer, but you need to be probably a little bit faster than your peers, otherwise you become beer lunch. So it's all about trying to quantify those kind of steps. And here, what usually really helps is to either have the conversations around the cybersecurity insurance or have the conversation with audit saying, okay, what do you look for? How can we ensure that our setup is proactively better? Don't wait for the audit findings are also fantastic to get things done, get funding for doing things. But it's, of course, if we can take it one step further and start doing things proactively, that really helps.
I've got a question, Martin. So obviously you've over your extensive career, you've become a trusted voice of identity access management advice in the industry. There's people all over Europe that follow your page, and they follow you to events like the Gartner event that you were at recently as well. Maybe you can sort of share a little bit about when an organization decides that they need to implement identity access management tools or identity access management within their program. What steps should they take, and what's the beginning of that whole process?
Well, I think the first part is to understand why, and the first part is to make sure that you have the internal team that has the mandate to learn. Now, is this something that is driven out of digital workplace? Are we trying to make sure that people have the right access on day one? Are we trying to keep cost control by removing the access, the licenses, etc., when they leave? That is one part. Another part could be regulatory compliance. So I have a friend who runs the IM department at a financial institution. They spend 80% of their time doing regulatory compliance. So that is also a reality. And having worked, and also it's not only financial institutions. If you look at, for example, if you're Food and Drug Administration, if you're selling to the US market, you will have GXP is very strong. And we're seeing also that the regulatory landscape is becoming more and more complex. So investing there is another good area if you need it from a business perspective. And then comes the cybersecurity part. Historically, the IM teams and the cybersecurity teams have kind of been in different worlds a bit. So the IM team has mostly been serving the digital workplace and the regulatory compliance, if that was a thing that you had in your operational reality, and then some cyber. But with the rise of the identity-based attacks, today, if you don't have identity as part of your cyber stance, you're going to have a very large open target. So you really need to have that, which means that the cyber team and the identity teams needs to work together and understand each other's realities.
So when you're building an identity team, then there are a few challenges that you face. And some of the challenges that I've discussed recently with some clients are it's either a huge skill gap in the industry, meaning they can't find people that have those skills locally within the region. And we know that in the Netherlands, they prefer Dutch speakers, right? A lot of companies do. Alternatively, there's the whole issue of do we use the financial resources that we have to skill up the workforce that we already have, and push people into the identity access management side. For you, how have you overcome challenges like that, and where do you see those challenges going in the next sort of 12 to 24 months?
So that is a little bit, of course, what kind of business you are. So my everyday work, I work for a global corporation, and of course that's a little bit of a different reality than if you're part of an SMB organization. We have been working together with a very strong partner, and we're very happy with working together with them. But that, of course, assumes that you have the funding to do that. I think the first part of this is to figure out, who is your IM part serving? What are the goals? How do we support the business? when it comes to supplying and talent, there is a couple of different parts to it. One thing to take into account is that if you, especially right now, there's quite a lot of people who are not fluent in the local language available. So if you're the type of organization that can operate in English, we operate in English as our primary language, even because I think we're 8 nationalities we used to be 8 nationalities in a team of 6. I think we're now to 9 people, so we're probably picked up a couple of nationalities as well. But we operate in English, sometimes a little bit in German, and occasionally in Swedish, but that's very occasionally. So that helps a lot. So if you can go in English, you will have a much deeper skill pool. The second part is to look at where do you need your resource to be located. Of course, it's fantastic if you're all in the same place, but we're distributed anyway. So we try to meet up a few days a week, and then we're located in a decently central place. But that's, of course, another part to it. But of course, if you need a very specific product, are located in a little bit of a corner of a country, and it needs local language, it's going to be really hard to find those kind of resources.
In terms of AI in cybersecurity and identity management, how do you see that role being played? Is it a positive thing or is it a negative thing, perhaps?
So I think there's a couple of different aspects to this. So one is, how can we leverage AI? So the attackers are happily leveraging AI to, for example, write beautiful phishing letters. So, for example, the Icelandic banks suddenly discovered that phishing was a problem because previously no one could write. It was very hard to find, scammers that could write good letters in phishing emails in Icelandic. Now with AI, you just press the button. And it's not only the language, it's also the tone of voice and all of those things. So the attackers are already using it. If you look defensively, AI is actually proving quite useful within the ITDR space. I actually have a talk on this at the EIC in a few weeks' time. And I would strongly recommend spending the time on, you do need to have ITDR process in place. AI is quite good at doing this kind of work. But you do need to look at how you can make the life of the AI easier. So how do you make sure that the AI has as much context as possible to make as good outcomes as possible? So, for example, if you have IP as if you look at, for example, using AI for ITDR, if IP is one way to figure out if you're internal or if you're an actual user or an attacker, then let's give that information to the AI so you can use that to grade the risk of the user during execution. The second part, of course, using AI as kind of the ambitious and very energetic intern to kind of help the users. And there, what you basically need to do is to figure out how do you make sure that you have a reasonable approach to what the AI should be allowed to do. Should it automatically have all your rights all the time? Well, then it becomes a very tasty target for attackers as well, because if they take over your AI, they will have the same right as you. Or how do you control that? And I know that there's a lot of work going into that right now, with new protocols being devised and new discussions. And there, I think the main thing is to try be really kind of listening in and see what's happening, and also try to figure out, how exactly where do you insert yourself into the conversation with the business? Because if you do nothing, the business will happily go away and, build all of their AI robots, and then you need to stop kind of reining them in. It's a little bit like, I would expect that AI is going to follow a little bit the same pattern as you saw in the cloud. So if you go back 10, 15 years, you had everything was done in on-premise data centers, which meant that, if you need a database, you went to the database team and said, hi, I want a database, and here is the stuff I need. And then they took them 2 weeks to build it, or then you got it back. And then initially, when you went into the cloud, you had, I can just click and order anything I want. But then, of course, next part comes in, okay, I can click and get anything I want. But then the security team comes and says, okay, how did you harden this database? and you say, "Oh, I don't really know. I'm not very good at pardoning databases. It's not my specialty." So unless you kind of are part of the conversation, that is likely what's going to happen, that the businesses and IT and business is going to just happily be like cows being released from the winter. They stay in the barns the entire winter, and then they happily go out and eat all the fresh grass. And then they discover a little bit later that, oops, this was perhaps not what I wanted.
So it sounds like it is a must-have going forward then, not a nice to have.
No, so I think definitely if you want to deliver as good, as much functionality as possible or as much value as possible, you definitely need to leverage as part of your work in specific places. And there is some really good research coming in on this topic that I recommend reading, both from Gartner and also from Cole and also from Simon at CyberHat. That will give you some guidance on this, where is it effective, because it's a little bit like it's a solution that is looking for its problems, and it's going to be really useful for certain things, but not for everything. The second part is, how do you guide and support the business using AI? And I definitely think that if you're not kind of on top of that train, the train is going to happily leave the station, and either you're on it or you're not. If you're not on it, then it's going to be very hard to kind of catch up with it.
So you're talking about solutions there, and we'll move past AI now. Is there anything that you're working on at the moment that you're really excited about, or is there a problem that you see at the moment that you wish there would be a solution for?
I think ITDR is, of course, a good topic in there, but I think we've come halfway as an overall industry. You're starting to see that within a specific suite. So if you're a just Microsoft company, then you can do, if you configure and tune and take care of your Entra risky user and so on, you can get some quite good results from that. But there, the next question comes, okay, so my Entra setup is protected. And if I just run Azure, that's fine. But in reality, you're probably going to run some, in a decently big enterprise and complex enterprise. You're probably going to have some on-premise, you're going to have something in AWS, you're going to have something in GCP, Oracle Cloud, perhaps, etc. And then comes the question, how do I connect all of these different worlds? Because it's very good that you figured out that the account for this user was compromised in the Azure world, but how do I make sure that I take that knowledge and goes into my GCP world as well? And perhaps this is self-evident. Perhaps you have an IDP with second sign-on, etc., and all of those things, but that's not always the case. So that is definitely one area that is really interesting right now. And you see new protocols like the SSF protocol, for example, Cape protocol, and Microsoft unfortunately has their own protocols in this space, which is not so useful. But this is a very interesting area that I think is going to take a lot of focus. You have the AI, both using as well as governing others' usage of it. That's definitely something. You have the non-human identity, and also kind of taking the next step on the cloud journey. That how do you manage all of the we used to talk about secrets management, but now it's become bigger than secrets management. It's all kind of all the entitlements and assets and accounts and etc. that sits across your infrastructure. What do you manage, and how do you manage all of these things? So NHI is also an important topic. And then it also depends a lot about, what kind of business are you? There is the wave of regulations coming in, and that's probably a little bit more if you're in European Union, perhaps a little bit less in UK, but I do see similar things in UK as well. How do you handle all of these new regulations in an efficient manner?
We always like to ask this question on the podcast. Failures. Everyone has them. Can you name one of your biggest failures and how you conquered it from a professional level?
One thing that can be really hard is to figure out why are you doing what you're doing. So I've had a number of of implementations, both when I worked in the US as well as here in the Netherlands, where you think that the goal is this way, and then you work really hard to get there, and then you get there and go like, but who was it really that wanted this? I don't really know, and then just evaporates. I spent a number of years ago, we tried to do recertification using an old Oracle OIM implementation. And I built something very complex for that leveraged APIs, and it worked actually quite well. But at the end of the day, the user interface was worse than using Excel sheets, so the business stayed with Excel sheets. Or cases where there was some idea of using advanced to try to remove the model on approach. So in many companies, you kind of say, okay, please make this new user just like Tim because Tim has the right access. And of course, that is from a security standpoint not ideal. And in theory, you can use all kinds of. Nowadays, you can of course use AI as well to figure out what kind of entitlements you're supposed to get, etc. But the problem there is the explainability, and that's another thing. Like you kind of go from a quite straightforward approach for the business. They say, make Carl just like Tim, to we get Carl a lot of different entitlements, and then you have someone has to say, is this right or not? So I think the one of the main things is to try to figure out kind of who are you serving and how do you solve their problems. That is not always an easy thing to do. And especially if you have an engineering background, you might be very focused on, this is a nice problem. I think I'll go and solve it. But if you're solving a problem that hasn't got a clear why it brings the business forward or how it serves the business, you're not going to be successful at the end of the day, even if you make a brilliant solution to a problem.
Yeah, and I think with the sort of rise in governance and risk and compliance, a lot of companies and a lot of organizations are saying, we know we have to do this, but we're only doing it because of the government and the risk and the compliance. So a lot of the organizations don't have, a clear goal to achieve. They just know that they have to do it. And some of the professionals that I've spoken to have raised that as a really interesting topic, actually, where they're like, well, I've been hired to do this, but there's not really any sort of clear goal at the end. All we know is that we need to put identity access management and, some sort of cybersecurity foundation in place. So it'll be interesting to see, like I said to Ben a few weeks ago, how that evolves over the next couple of years and whether the company starts to really sort of, take that seriously a little bit more.
Yeah, and on the GRC side, I think that's also another area that's very interesting because, of course, the conventional is that you have your 100 or 500 controls or something, and you're supposed to write into an Excel sheet or some form of a web interface, go like, how do you implement this control, etc. What we do see in some of the more kind of mature organizations is that you get a kind of landing zone. So pick this landing zone, and then because you picked a landing zone that was pre-hardened, it's also pre-GRC. So press the button and all the control information goes out. Like, okay, you use a database from your Azure hardened landing zone. Okay, then all the GRC information automatically can be populated. What is the stance of this? You can even do it real time so that you can in real time see what is the GRC stance of your entire setup.
Yeah.
Of course, that requires quite a lot of investments, but on the other hand, it has some very nice effects of having your teams working on things that adds business value instead of filling out forms.
Yeah, it's an expensive issue, but it's worth the money. In the long term. Yeah, for sure.
And of course, as a professional, if you're hired to do this NIS2 compliance or something, and you feel like you're just running around and it's not very clear why you're doing what you're doing, then at the end of the day, you need to figure out if, on the one hand, if you're hired to do something as a contractor, your job is to do what you've been contracted to do. Because of course, there's a difference between being an employee and being a contractor.
Indeed. So For you, Martin, in terms of events and talks, what else have you got coming up?
So we have EIC coming in a few weeks' time. So I'm really looking forward to that. Then here in the Netherlands, we have at the end of May, we have Hilleview, which is another similar, much smaller conference, more local, more for the lot of the local Dutch companies. And then it's Identity Week coming up after that, in a few weeks later after that.
You're going to be very busy on social media and at these events then?
Yes, probably going to be quite busy. I'm always interested in trying to highlight also. People spend a lot of time preparing their talks. And of course, it's not bad trying to spend a bit of time before the event, just researching what talks is there that is most interesting for you.
Brilliant.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today, Martin. It's been really great to get all of your insight. Thank you for coming on.